I remember the day vividly. Dust motes dancing in the golden afternoon light, the hush of my grandmother's attic, and a moment my hand brushed against an ancient leather cover hidden in a battered wooden chest. That was the moment I realized I was holding something far more than an heirloom. I had discovered my great-grandfather's journal. Its spine cracked with age. The cover bore the faint scent of spices and sand, and inside, on yellowed pages, he had documented his journey as an explorer in Egypt. This is his story, as told through my eyes, through the words he left behind. I opened the first entry. Cairo, January 1934. He spoke of stepping off the train, the air thick with heat and dust. He described minarets piercing the sky and merchants calling from crowded souks, the smell of roasted coffee and incense weaving through the chaos. His pen danced across the page, capturing the city's pulse. He wrote he'd been sent by a small British-funded archaeological society to assist in mapping and deciphering lesser-known pyramids long neglected by the colonial diggers. The tone was professional, calm, but beneath it lay something else. Curiosity honed sharper than any trowel. By March, he had reached the site of the Great Pyramid. He described walking its path at dawn, the limestone blocks glowing rose at sunrise, casting long, trembling shadows. His words carried awe, but also caution. The stones breathe with age, he wrote, and one can feel the secrets they guard with something almost wild in their stillness. Even then, I felt chills. He mentioned guides whispering of curses, vague warnings about angry gods and restless spirits, but he dismissed them as superstition. That quiet dismissal gave me pause as I held the book. Was it pride or ignorance? As April turned to May, he delved deeper into the desert and into tunnels unseen by modern archaeologists. In shaky handwriting, he sketched glyphs inside a narrow shaft, hieroglyphs that seemed to pulse in the torchlight. I swear I saw movement among the shadows, he scribbled. Not the tremor of wind, but something shifting just beyond the edge of light. He described hearing whispers echoing down the stone corridors, and how he felt watched. My breath caught as I read. The air around me felt heavier. I wondered if the spirits still lingered in these worn pages. Then came a night in late May 1934. My great-grandfather recounted being trapped inside a collapsed chamber. He and his local assistant had been cataloging artifacts, small statuettes, jars, papyri, when a sudden tremor shook the structure. The ceiling groaned, limestone dust rained down, and the shaft sealed behind them. He described crawling in the dark, torchlight flickering as relief became desperate. I thought we'd become relics ourselves, he wrote. That phrase lingered in my chest. Relics ourselves. He detailed digging with bare hands, blood mixing with sand, the taste of fear thick on his tongue. Eventually, he and his assistant clawed through rubble, bursting free into the starless night. They staggered back to camp under a moonless sky, limbs aching, morale shattered, but alive. The next entry was written in Cairo again, several weeks later. He'd returned to the pyramid site to apologize to the locals he'd nearly lost, offered gifts and thanks. He spoke humbly of the desert's power, of how foolish pride had almost doomed them. Yet, even in his remorse, he confessed fascination. The darkness in those corridors is seductive, he wrote. I wish I could explore forever, but I know that wish grows dangerous with every step. That was where the journal paused. The ink before me ended abruptly mid-sentence. A smudge, a tear, or perhaps sudden interruption had halted his writing. I turned to the next page, empty. I closed the book, heart pounding, mouth dry. What had stopped him there? What darkness had silenced his pen? The silence in that blank page was louder than any words. I stood in the quiet attic, the sun now drifting toward twilight, and thought. I needed to know what happened next. But before I dared read further, I paused. This wasn't just history. It was a warning, a whisper across decades that something in Egypt had watched, had breathed, and had waited. Something that nearly claimed him long before he ever stepped foot back home. I hope you enjoy this first, thrilling part of the story. Stay tuned for part 2, where the journal resumes, and terrible secrets begin to unfold. A week passed since I first discovered that folded parchment near the end of the journal. Every day, I felt compelled and anxious, dragging my eyes toward the attic box, drawn back into my great-grandfather's world. When I finally dared to continue, I unfolded the brittle sheet and held my breath. These pages, it seemed, told the story he had never included in the main entries, perhaps too dangerous to commit to the bound book. It began with Cairo, July 12, 1934. I returned to Cairo under a pall of dread and fascination. My dreams had grown restless. Visions of golden figures drifting at the edges of sleep, of corridors stretching beyond geometry, and of warning voices in a tongue I could not name. His pen had rushed into illegibility in places, ink bleeding at corners. He wrote how he joined a small French expedition, then operating in Upper Egypt. Their destination, a remote plateau beyond Giza, known only in local whispers as Kezimet El-Adrab, the Hollow of Bones. The natives refused to guide them, saying curses would kill any who disturbed that ground. He wrote, I had dismissed superstition, confident in my reason and lanterns. But the desert wind felt colder as we neared that barred plateau. At dusk, dunes crinkled under my boots as though sighing beneath. The air tasted faintly metallic. They discovered the entrance nearly swallowed by drifting dunes, an arch of blackened stone, jagged and ancient. He sketched crude glyphs at its threshold, wings unfurled around an eye. Beneath those, a sarcophagus rose from the sand, carved in obsidian black rock. No inscriptions, only a single gaze, blowing frost into his chest as he stared. The eye seemed alive. That night, they camped nearby under a swelling moon. My great-grandfather reported hearing chanting, soft, inhuman, rising and descending like wind on dunes, and shadow figures racing between dunes beyond the firelight. He described sweating, yet feeling ice upon his skin. Then, at midnight, one of the French assistants shrieked. We rushed to the edge of camp. His mind had gone mad. He spoke of faces in the sand, of sand that breathed and slammed at him. He clawed at his eyes, screaming that the sarcophagus had sat open and watched him sleep. Terrified, they returned to the entrance. There, the sarcophagus lay open, lid discarded into the sand, and inside, empty. The carved eye glinted in torchlight, unblinking. My great-grandfather wrote. My rational mind rebelled. I catalogued ink-like pottery, still littered around. But the sarcophagus, empty. I felt that consciousness left it. The assistant fled into the night, delirious. He was never found. The others blamed heat stroke. But my ancestor knew it wasn't delirium. It was horror. Determined to press onward, he and the remaining guides entered the tomb. Deep inside, corridors stretched into impossibly narrow shafts, walls inscribed with glyphs dripping ichor-colored ink. He detailed scenes, a king sacrificed, sand turning to blood, gods leaving pillars of flame. Some hieroglyphs glowed, faintly even in darkness, casting pulses of crimson. He wrote how he almost collapsed, visions swimming, shadows clamping his heart. Strange laughter bled through corridors, mocking. He felt followed. He scribbled. Around a bend, I saw her, wrapped in golden darkness, slender as a statue, eyes hollow yet infinite. She raised a hand and beckoned. I felt the world tilt around me. He rushed back, utterly breathless, stumbling into the desert dawn alone. His guides had fled. Through exhaustion, delirium, and terror, he reached the main camp. He described tossing away his notebook in panic, wanting no more of these mad scribbles. He swore he'd stop, stay in Cairo, return to Europe. Yet, his hand trembled as he wrote. Something stayed behind me in the corridors, a presence that whispers still. He stopped midline. The writing on that page ended in a smear. Not a blank page this time, but ink seeping like blood. Fear glared out of that smear. I closed the journal, shaking. The room felt colder. The attic window rattled. I sat in silence and stared at the empty page that followed. Something in these words pulsed with a living dread, as if those corridors still breathed beyond time. And yet my curiosity screamed. Who, or what, had watched him from the sarcophagus? What entity lurked behind those winged glyphs? I gathered the journal to my chest and breathed slowly. Did I dare continue? The next entries lay deeper into his return voyage. How the nightmares followed him home. How he nearly died in the Mediterranean crossing. How he tried to burn the pages. That I promised him I would read. I had trouble sleeping after reading the second part of my great-grandfather's writings. The vivid hallucinations he described, the madness that overtook his companions, and the sense that something had left the sarcophagus, something intelligent and ancient, sat heavily in my thoughts. But what disturbed me most was how the tone of his writing had shifted. The scholar's curiosity had darkened into obsession, and then fear. Yet he hadn't stopped. Several pages remained, hidden in the false bottom of the journal. It took me a day to bring myself to unfold them. The top one was dated August 6th, 1934, exactly 91 years ago to the day. The voyage home has become a torment. I cannot distinguish sea from sky anymore. My mind is slipping, and the thing follows. He was aboard a passenger steamer heading toward Marseille, with plans to travel back to England afterward. But the entries made clear he no longer believed he'd make it that far. He spoke of visions at sea, of faces in the waves and dreams in which he walked the tomb endlessly, never able to leave. He wrote, "There are days I feel I never escaped the hollow, that I merely sleepwalked from its depths while my soul remained behind." The ship's crew reportedly began to avoid him. He described waking in his bunk with wet sand in his shoes. On another night, he found small piles of ash beneath his pillow. No fire had been nearby. He questioned his sanity, but then mentioned overhearing two other passengers murmuring about a strange man who never sleeps, who whispers in a tongue no one understands. And then came the storm. On August 9th, the sea turned black and violent. Waves slammed the vessel, tossing passengers. Amid the chaos, a crew member was swept overboard. But what my great-grandfather described was no normal storm. Lightning cracked the sky, but the light that flashed wasn't white. It was green, sickly, ancient. I stood at the edge of the ship's railing and saw shapes beneath the waves. They weren't fish. They weren't human. They watched me with the same eye carved into that damned sarcophagus. He claimed that night something called to him, not in words, but through emotion, a deep gravitational pull toward the water, as if the sea had become an extension of the tomb. He held onto a railing to keep from jumping. He said he knew if he entered the water, he wouldn't drown. He claimed, after the storm, he was found unconscious in the storage hold, clutching an old funerary amulet he had looted from the chamber. It was shaped like a falcon, wings curled, with that same obsidian eye embedded in its chest. He had no memory of retrieving it, yet it was warm in his hands. Back in Marseille, he was detained briefly by authorities, disoriented and talking nonsense by their report. A doctor claimed he was suffering from extreme heat stroke and psychological trauma from the expedition. But in his journal, he wrote otherwise. "They think me broken. I'm not. I am haunted." He spoke of the voice growing clearer. He began calling it, the golden figure he saw in the tomb. She began to appear to him in mirrors, in dreams, even reflected in the still surface of his tea. Always silent, always watching, sometimes smiling. His final journey home to England was uneventful on the outside, but in the journal, his tone became desperate. He tried to destroy the funerary amulet once in Dover, tossing it into the channel. But the next morning, it was on his nightstand. "I am tethered," he wrote. "It is not possession, not exactly. I am being remembered by something that shouldn't remember." And then, on the final page, "Tonight, I will bury this journal where I cannot find it. Let sleep. Let no one follow me into the sand. But if you are reading this, know that she never forgets. The hollow watches all who look too long. No signature, no date." I leaned back from the final page, hands trembling. The room around me was silent, too silent. I checked the window. Closed. Yet the air seemed to hum. The amulet, mentioned so many times, was not with the journal, but I had an awful feeling that perhaps it was never physical to begin with. Or worse, it was somewhere still waiting. And then it struck me. This wasn't just a journal. It was a chain, a transmission. My great-grandfather had carried the curse back, and it had waited patiently in ink and silence. For decades, until someone opened the book again. Until me. For days after reading the final page of my great-grandfather's journal, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted around me. Not in the way of melodrama or fiction, but subtly, disturbingly. A crack in perception. The house groaned in new tones at night. I awoke with vague dreams still crawling in my head. Always tunnels, always her. The golden figure. She never spoke, yet I felt her voice echo inside me. I told myself it was simply the power of suggestion. Old journals, eerie stories, a lonely attic. Surely my mind had spiraled. But on the morning of August 1st, I noticed something I couldn't explain, a mark on the inside of my wrist. 3 faint lines, intersecting to form an eye, exactly like the one described in the tomb. At first I thought it was ink, some residual transfer from the journal. I scrubbed until the skin burned. It didn't fade. That night, the first real vision came. I was in the tomb, not a dream, not in the symbolic way we imagine dreams. I was there. I smelled the stale sand, felt the low humidity on my tongue. My footsteps echoed against black stone. I held a torch, though I never saw myself light it. Ahead, she stood in the same golden headdress, eyes dark hollows, arms outstretched. Behind her, the open sarcophagus waited, empty, expectant. I ran. The next morning, I woke gasping. The soles of my feet were dusty. I tried to shake it off. I buried the journal again, deep in the crawl space beneath my house, wrapped in canvas and duct tape. I promised myself I'd move on, but the eye remained on my wrist, and the dreams returned. Every night, I began researching Kezimet Eladrab, the Hollow of Bones. Nothing official existed, but on obscure archaeology forums, old posts hinted at it. One user, now deleted, had shared a blurry photo of glyphs matching those my ancestors sketched. Another claimed a sarcophagus had been smuggled from Egypt to a private European collection in the 1950s. No proof, just whispers. Then came the envelope. It arrived without a return address. Inside, a single photo, aged and cracked. My great-grandfather, standing beside what looked like the same obsidian sarcophagus, wide open. And a note. She remembers. I threw it out. But the next morning, it was on my kitchen table. That week, I started blacking out. Sometimes for seconds. Other times, I'd lose hours. One night, I came to standing barefoot in the park 2 miles from my home. Another time, I awoke at my desk with ancient symbols scribbled across an open notebook. Glyphs I don't remember writing. My handwriting. My pen. But not my thoughts. Worse still, I began seeing her reflection behind me in mirrors, just for a moment. Always just as I blinked or turned, but enough to feel my breath freeze. She never moved. She simply watched. Desperate, I contacted an Egyptologist from the university, Dr. Kayla Morgan. Young, brilliant, and deeply skeptical. I brought her the photocopied pages of the journal. Not the real thing, I still feared it too much. She studied the glyphs and muttered, "No pharaoh. No god. This is pre-dynastic. Proto-cultic. Not worship. Containment. Containment of what?" I asked. She looked up pale. Something they feared more than death. Something they tried to erase from the record. "You should burn this." I didn't tell her I already tried. August 3rd, 2 nights ago, I woke with sand in my bed. And this time, a voice whispered my name. Not from outside the room, but from inside me. A resonance that rattled behind my ribs. I curled into myself, shaking, whispering that it wasn't real, that I was having a breakdown. And then the mark on my wrist began to glow. Just faintly, just enough to cast a shadow. I returned to the journal yesterday. I dug it out. My hands trembled. I opened to the last page and saw something new. A sentence had appeared, not on my great-grandfather's hand. It was darker, ink still tacky. He was only the first. I dropped the book and ran. Now it's August 4th, tonight. I'm writing this because I don't know how long I have before the final change. Something is waking in me. A memory not mine. A place I've never been but know too well. Sometimes I speak in languages I don't know. I write without meaning to. My reflection smiles when I don't. And I know what's coming. The chain my ancestor tried to break. It's unbroken. The hollow is not a place. It's a passage, a binding, a lineage. And I was the next in line. August 5th. I write this with no certainty that I'm still entirely myself. The mark on my wrist has darkened. No longer a pale outline, but a deep, black sigil that pulses faintly in dim light. I can feel it now. Not like a tattoo on skin, but like a brand beneath the bone. It whispers. It watches. I've barely slept. When I close my eyes, I'm no longer dreaming. I'm remembering. Not my memories, but hers. The golden woman from the tomb. The one my great-grandfather saw. The one who followed him across oceans and decades. Her life is flooding into me. She wasn't a goddess. Not in the way we understand. She was older. A guardian? A jailer? Or the prisoner herself? I see flashes. Rituals performed beneath eclipsed suns, priests crying blood, pyramids that predate any known map. She was called Nehemeset, the devourer between worlds. Her image was erased from temples, her followers buried alive. But they never truly killed her. They sealed her in that sarcophagus, in a hollow of bones, and bound her memory in symbols no modern eye could read. Until someone disturbed the seal. Until my great-grandfather opened the tomb. Until I read the journal. Last night, I returned to the attic. I took the journal, the photocopied glyphs, and every scrap of evidence, and drove to the coast. There, I found the same cliff path my great-grandfather had walked when he first tried to destroy the amulet. The sea thrashed below, as if waiting. I set everything ablaze. The flames roared high. Pages crumpled. Ink hissed. For a moment, I felt lighter, free. But then the wind turned. Smoke spiraled inward, not upward. Into me. I stumbled back coughing, and when I looked again, the ashes had formed a perfect eye in the sand. And from the surf, I heard her name whispered. Today, I tried contacting Dr. Kayla Morgan again. Her office told me she was missing, vanished during a solo trip to Egypt. The last thing she accessed was a photograph of an obsidian coffin, one I never showed her. I'm alone now, except I'm not. I hear footsteps behind me when no one is there. Reflections linger after I move. I've started writing in a language I've never studied. My voice sometimes echoes with a tone that isn't mine. And just this morning, I looked in a mirror and saw a golden headdress faintly flickering atop my head, like a crown from another age. I think I am becoming her. Or maybe I always was. It was never about the tomb, never about the journal. The hollow isn't a place beneath Egypt. It's a space within, a crack in the soul, a place where memory and identity are undone and reshaped. The ancient priests didn't bury her body. They buried her essence, split her soul, scattered it across bloodlines, waiting for the right conditions, the right vessel, to awaken the full power again. My great-grandfather was the first trigger. His exposure brought the fragment to life. But it was incomplete, and he died with it writhing in his chest. I, however, finished the ritual. By reading, by dreaming, by believing, I opened the eye fully. And now, she is no longer trapped. I feel her now in every breath. The way I see light bending in corners. How I can hear insects whisper their own names. I look at ancient symbols and understand. The dead speak to me. I carry the hollow with me now. And I realize something terrible. She was never evil. She was justice. A reckoning cast down by jealous gods. A being who saw too much, who remembered too deeply. The curse isn't madness. It's clarity. I see how hollow the world is now. How fragile. How much we've forgotten. And I know what I must do. This is my last entry. Not because the story ends here, but because my voice is no longer my own. When next I speak, I will speak for her. When I will walk not only in my shoes, but in her ancient stride. I will carry the hollow through the world. And others will follow. You might already feel it. A strange dream. A glyph you've seen somewhere before. A whisper in a language that curls under your skin. She's reaching for you now. If you've read this far, it's already begun. The eye is open, and it sees you,